What would you do if your own son shouted at you to clean his bathroom after you gave up your entire life to raise him? Imagine being told you're an embarrassment by the very child you sacrificed everything for. If you've ever lived through, or even witnessed, a painful story like this, share your thoughts below. Comment where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. The sky over Chicago was a washed-out gray that Sunday afternoon, the kind of autumn sky that feels heavy with secrets. Helen Carter drove the 40 miles from her small home in Cleveland to her son Daniel's polished suburban neighborhood. Her old Ford sedan rattled along the highway, its heater humming just enough to keep the chill off her hands. She had made this trip almost every week since Daniel got married, each time carrying with her the same fragile hope that maybe today her son would look at her the way he used to, before success had built a wall between them. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, not from the cold but from the unease that had become familiar. A mother's heart is strong, but it's also tender, easily bruised by the smallest of words when they come from her child. She pressed on, telling herself that no matter how difficult Daniel could be, she was his mother, and nothing would ever change that. When she pulled into the driveway of Daniel's pristine 2-story home, she caught sight of the immaculate lawn, the perfectly trimmed hedges, and the gleaming black BMW parked out front. Everything about the house screamed success, comfort, and pride. And yet, as Helen stepped out of her car, she felt smaller than she had in years, like she didn't quite belong in the world her son now inhabited. She smoothed down her cardigan, tucked a loose strand of gray hair behind her ear, and rang the doorbell. Daniel opened the door a moment later, phone in one hand, his tie already loosened from church. He looked every inch the polished marketing executive, his shirt crisp, his watch expensive, his expression distracted. "Mom, you're here," he said flatly, stepping aside without warmth. Helen's chest tightened. No hug, no smile, just those few clipped words. Still, she forced a smile of her own and stepped inside. The air smelled of scented candles and lemon cleaner. The kitchen counters gleamed like showroom displays. "Did you have a good morning at church?" she asked, trying to bridge the silence. Daniel barely looked at her. "Fine. Fallon's upstairs getting ready. We've got people coming tonight." "My boss, actually." Helen's smile widened, though her heart dipped. "That's wonderful. You must be proud. Maybe I can help with dinner, set the table." Daniel cut her off with a sharp glance. "Actually, Mom, could you do me a favor? The guest bathroom needs cleaning. Fallon noticed it earlier." Helen blinked. "The bathroom?" "Yes, just make sure it's spotless. Mr. Peterson is picky about appearances." The words stung, like a slap she hadn't expected. "Daniel, I thought I'd stay for dinner like I usually do." Her son exhaled impatiently, running a hand through his styled hair. "Mom, please don't make this hard. Fallon and I can't risk you embarrassing us tonight." "You're not working right now, and people notice those things. Just clean the bathroom before you head out. That would help us." Helen felt the floor shift under her. Embarrassment, unemployed, disposable. The boy she had raised, the boy she had sat up with through fevers and nightmares, was looking at her as though she were little more than hired help. Her throat tightened. She glanced at the gleaming kitchen, remembering how she had once given Daniel the last of her savings to help him buy this very house. How she had scrubbed toilets in strangers' offices at midnight to pay for his Little League fees. How she had skipped meals so he could afford textbooks in college. And now, here she stood, being ordered to scrub his bathroom as though her sacrifices had never happened. "I see," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel nodded briskly, already looking back at his phone. "Thanks, Mom. Fallon will really appreciate it." Helen moved down the hallway in a daze. She found the guest bathroom, its tile floor gleaming cold and white. The cleaning supplies were already laid out, as though someone had anticipated her compliance. She knelt, her knees aching, and picked up the toilet brush. With each stroke, her hands trembled, not from the scrubbing but from the weight of betrayal pressing against her chest. Tears blurred her vision until the porcelain swam before her eyes. In the kitchen, she heard laughter, Daniel and Fallon sharing a private joke, already preparing for their perfect evening, as though she were invisible. Minutes felt like hours. By the time Helen emerged, her back ached, Her hands smelled of harsh chemicals, and her dignity felt worn thin. Daniel was arranging throw pillows in the living room, while Fallon adjusted a vase of lilies. Neither looked up when she cleared her throat. "All done," she said softly. "Did you get behind the toilet?" Fallon asked, without glancing at her. "Yes." "Good," Daniel said, already scrolling through his phone again. "You should probably head home now, Mom. We need to finish getting ready." Helen picked up her purse from the hall table. She noticed the framed photos lining it. Daniel and Fallon at their wedding, Daniel at a charity gala, Fallon smiling in Paris. Not a single photo of her. It was as if her role in his life had been erased, scrubbed away as thoroughly as the bathroom she had just cleaned. She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. "Will I see you next Sunday?" Daniel didn't even look up. "We'll see. Fallon's mom might be in town. Better keep it simple." Simple. Without her. Helen nodded, unable to trust her voice, and stepped out into the crisp October air. The door clicked shut behind her, muffling the sound of Fallon's laughter, sharp and bright like glass shattering in her chest. The drive home blurred past in streaks of stoplights and tears. She gripped the steering wheel tighter with each mile, the word embarrassment echoing in her mind like a cruel refrain. By the time she pulled into her modest driveway, the sun was sinking low, casting long shadows across the yard. Through the kitchen window, she saw Robert moving about, humming softly as he prepared dinner. Her husband of just 8 months, kind, gentle, steady. He had never raised his voice to her, never made her feel like less than she was. Helen sat in the car for a long moment, staring at him through the glass. She knew that the instant she walked through that door, Robert would look at her, see the redness around her eyes, and ask what was wrong. He always knew. And then he would try to fix it. But how could anyone fix this? How could anyone mend the wound of being rejected by your only child? She wiped her cheeks, tried to force a smile, and stepped inside. The warmth of roasted potatoes and slow-cooked beef greeted her, mingling with the scent of Robert's cologne. "Hey there, beautiful," he said, without turning the way he always did. Helen's chest tightened again, but this time from something different. Gratitude, aching and profound. She whispered a soft reply, but her voice shook. Robert turned, brow furrowed, his kind brown eyes searching hers. "Rough day?" Helen forced a laugh, brittle as glass. "Just tired." But inside she wondered, should I tell him? Should I confess the truth of what Daniel said? That his stepson sees me as nothing more than a burden? She sat down at the kitchen table, the hum of the oven filling the silence. For the first time in her life, Helen Carter wasn't sure if she could keep her pain hidden. And what would happen if Robert learned the truth? Would he be angry? Would he confront Daniel? Or did Robert hold secrets of his own that Helen had yet to discover? Helen stared at Robert across the small kitchen table, her hands trembling around a warm cup of coffee. She wanted to pour out everything, the humiliation, the heartbreak, the word embarrassment still echoing in her ears. But before she could speak, Robert leaned forward, his voice unusually steady. "Helen," he said softly, "there's something I need to tell you, something I've never told anyone." And with that, the quiet kitchen no longer felt safe. It felt like the edge of a revelation. What secret could Robert be hiding? And how might it change everything Helen thought she knew? Helen sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around the mug Robert had set in front of her. The steam from the coffee curled upward, warm and comforting, but it could not melt the ice lodged in her chest. She forced herself to sip, the bitter taste mingling with the salt of tears she hadn't yet wiped away. Robert watched her quietly. He had always been good at that, at listening even before words were spoken. His kind brown eyes lingered on her face, reading the small tremors, the uneven breaths. Finally, he reached across the table, resting his weathered hand over hers. "Something happened today," he said softly. Helen wanted to deny it. She wanted to brush it away, to pretend she was simply tired from the drive, that the redness around her eyes came from the wind. But his touch, steady and patient, unlocked something inside her. Her lips trembled. "Daniel?" she whispered. Robert's hand tightened. "What did he do?" Helen tried to steady herself, but the memory came back with brutal clarity. Daniel's voice, sharp as a whip, ordering her to clean his bathroom, the word embarrassment echoing in her ears. Her chest burned with shame as she repeated it aloud. He told me I was an embarrassment. He wouldn't let me stay for dinner with his boss. He made me scrub the guest bathroom while he and Fallon laughed in the kitchen. The words hung heavy in the warm little room. For a long time, Robert said nothing, his jaw clenched, his eyes darkening with something Helen had never seen before: fury. "You scrubbed their bathroom?" His voice, usually calm, cut like steel. Helen looked down at the table, ashamed. "I didn't know what else to do. I just wanted to keep the peace. I didn't want to make things harder for him." Robert pushed his chair back sharply, the legs scraping the floor. He stood, pacing to the window, his back rigid. For months, Helen had known him as a gentleman, a widower who found joy in cooking, gardening, and small routines. But now, she saw a different side, one that carried weight, authority, power. "Helen," he said, still facing the window, "do you know who I really am?" She blinked, startled. "Robert, of course I know who you are. You're my husband." He turned then, and there was something almost unrecognizable in his expression. "No, you don't. Not all of it." Her heart skipped. "What are you talking about?" Robert walked back to the table, sat down, and leaned forward. "I've let you believe I'm just a retired man who worked in technology. That's not a lie, but it's not the whole truth either." He paused, studying her face. "I founded a company 25 years ago. Fitz Industries. We manufacture medical devices across the East Coast. We employ over 8,000 people." Helen's breath caught. She had heard of Fitz Industries. Hospitals across Ohio and beyond used their equipment. It was a name that carried weight in the business world. "You founded Fitz Industries?" Robert nodded slowly. "And I still own nearly half the company. I stepped back from day-to-day management when Margaret was sick, but the truth is I'm still the largest shareholder. That company worth billions. Helen still has my fingerprints on every decision it makes." Helen sat frozen, her mind reeling. The man who kissed her forehead every morning, who teased her about burning toast, was quietly one of the most powerful men she'd ever heard of. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. Robert reached for her hand again, his expression softening. "Because when I met you, I wasn't Robert Fitzgerald, the CEO. I was just Robert. A widower, lonely, looking for someone to share coffee with. And you saw me. Not the company, not the money. Just me." Tears welled in Helen's eyes. "But Daniel, his company, Davidson Marketing, they work with Fitz Industries, don't they?" Robert's lips curved into a grim line. "Yes. They handle our advertising campaigns, and right now, they're desperate to keep our contract. Without it, Davidson Marketing could collapse." Helen's chest constricted. "So Daniel's job depends on Fitz," Robert finished, "and he has no idea that the man he dismisses as an old retiree is the one holding his career in the palm of his hand." The kitchen was silent, but for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Helen's heart pounded. "You can't tell him," she whispered. "Robert, you can't use this against him. He's still my son." Robert studied her, his jaw tightening again. "Helen, the way he treated you today is beyond cruel. He stripped you of your dignity in your own son's home. That can't stand." Her tears spilled over. "I don't want revenge. I just want my son back. The little boy I raised, the one who used to draw me crayon pictures and call me his best friend." Robert reached up, cupping her face. His voice dropped to a tender whisper. "You deserve respect, Helen. If he won't give it willingly, then maybe it's time he learns what happens when you treat your mother like dirt." She shivered, torn between fear and relief. For years she had borne Daniel's dismissals, his condescension, convincing herself it was just stress, just pressure. But now, for the first time, someone was willing to fight for her. Robert leaned back, his eyes sharp. "Tomorrow I have a meeting with our board in New York. After that, I'm flying to Chicago. Davidson Marketing's leadership, including Daniel, will be in that room, and I will tell them exactly who I am." Helen's breath hitched. "Robert, no. Please. If you do this, you'll humiliate him. You'll destroy whatever's left of our relationship." He held her gaze, unflinching. Or I'll save it. Sometimes a man needs to be broken down before he can be rebuilt. The question is, are you ready for the truth to change everything? The question lingered in the air like smoke. Helen couldn't answer, her heart twisted with love for her son and gratitude for the man before her. She wanted to believe there was still a way forward without shattering everything. But deep down, she knew Robert was right. Daniel had crossed a line that could not be ignored. That night, Helen lay awake long after Robert had fallen asleep beside her. She stared at the ceiling, the word embarrassment burning in her mind, colliding with Robert's revelation. She had thought her life was small now, quiet and unremarkable. But suddenly, she was standing at the edge of something vast, something that could rewrite everything she thought she knew about her family. She closed her eyes, whispering into the darkness, "God, please don't let me lose him completely." The next morning, as Helen poured coffee into her cup, Robert's phone rang. His expression shifted as he listened, his eyes narrowing with focus. "There's been an accident at the Fitz plant in New Jersey," he said, his voice crisp, controlled. "Several workers are injured. Davidson Marketing is already calling, worried about the fallout." He looked at Helen, his jaw set. This changes everything. And for the first time, Helen realized her son's fate was about to collide head-on with the secret life of her husband. What will happen when Robert walks into that Chicago boardroom? And how will Daniel react when the truth is finally revealed? The news came like a thunderclap. Robert had barely hung up the phone before the kitchen felt different, less like the cozy, sunlit place where Helen found comfort, and more like the command center of a storm she didn't yet understand. "There's been an accident at one of the Fitz facilities in New Jersey," Robert explained, his voice clipped, professional. "Chemical exposure. Several workers injured. The board is scrambling. Davidson Marketing is terrified of the bad press." Helen set down her coffee cup, her hands trembling. "Workers injured? Are they going to be okay?" Robert's eyes softened briefly. "I'll make sure they get the best care possible. But the fallout, it's not just medical bills. It's public perception. Contracts, stockholders. Davidson Marketing has 70% of their revenue tied up in us. If Fitz pulls away, they'll collapse. And your son," he paused, "your son may lose everything." The words struck Helen like a blow. She thought of Daniel's immaculate house, his carefully curated life with Fallon, his fragile pride. She thought of his cutting words the day before, embarrassment. And still, her mother's heart twisted with dread. "You're saying Daniel's company could go under because of this accident?" she whispered. Robert nodded, leaning against the counter, his face grim. "And Davidson Marketing's meeting with Fitz tomorrow morning. Daniel will be there. So will I." Helen's pulse quickened. "Robert, please don't use this to punish him." Robert's gaze locked with hers, steady and unyielding. "This isn't punishment, Helen. It's truth. He needs to understand the weight of his choices. You deserve better than being treated like hired help by your own son. If he won't respect you as his mother, maybe he'll respect the man who controls his career." Helen's chest ached. She wanted to believe Daniel could change without being broken first, but something inside her whispered that perhaps this was the only way. That night, Helen barely slept. She lay awake listening to the steady rhythm of Robert's breathing, her thoughts looping endlessly. She prayed for the injured workers, for Daniel, for strength she wasn't sure she had. At dawn, the phone rang again. Helen startled, fumbling to answer, but Robert already had it in his hand. She heard his voice shift into the crisp, commanding tone she now recognized as the voice of Robert Fitzgerald, not just her husband. "Yes, Marcus, I'll be at the plant first. Then I'll head straight to Chicago. Make sure Peterson and his team are ready by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning." When he hung up, he glanced at Helen, his expression unreadable. "Davidson Marketing will be fighting for their survival tomorrow, and so will Daniel." Helen pressed a hand to her chest, whispering, "God, help us." By late afternoon, Helen was folding laundry when the phone rang again. She almost ignored it, weary from the emotional weight of the day, but the caller ID made her freeze. Daniel. Her hand shook as she lifted the receiver. "Hello? Mom." His voice was sharp, panicked, so unlike the confident son she knew. "Mom, I need your help." Helen sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the phone. "Daniel, what's wrong?" "There was an accident at Fitz Industries. You've seen the news, right? It's all over. And now Peterson says they might terminate our contract. Mom, if they pull out, Davidson is finished. Do you get that? 70% of our income is Fitz. Without them, we're done. I'll lose my job. Fallon and I will lose the house. Everything. His words tumbled out like a flood, desperate and breathless. Helen closed her eyes, steadying her voice. Daniel, I'm sure it's not as bad as it seems. Accidents happen. No, you don't understand. Daniel's voice cracked. Fitz's legal team is meeting with us tomorrow. Peterson thinks it's over. Mom, I need... He hesitated, then rushed on. I need money. Just a loan. $20,000. Please, just until I can find another job. Helen's breath caught. 20,000? Yes, I know you and Robert don't have much, but maybe Robert could co-sign, or... Helen's heart clenched. Just days ago, he had reduced her to nothing, refused to let her sit at his dinner table. And now, suddenly, she was family again, the one he turned to in desperation. Daniel. Her voice faltered. Please, Mom. His voice broke, raw and boyish, the sound of the child she once comforted after nightmares. Please. Fallon's already furious. If I can't fix this, she'll leave me. I'll lose everything. Helen pressed her free hand against her eyes, her tears spilling. She wanted to help him, to rescue him like she always had, but she knew she couldn't. Not this time. Not like this. I can't promise anything, she whispered. Let me talk to Robert. Thank you, Mom. I knew you'd help me. I'll call tomorrow morning before the meeting. He hung up quickly, leaving her staring at the silent receiver, her heart pounding. Moments later, she heard the rumble of Robert's truck pulling into the driveway. He walked in, his suit wrinkled, his face lined with exhaustion. Helen saw the weight he carried, the injured workers, the board, the future of thousands, and now her son. Robert, she said softly. Daniel called. His gaze sharpened immediately. What did he want? Helen told him everything. Daniel's panic, his plea for money, his fear of losing Fallon. Robert listened, his jaw tightening with each word. He wants $20,000, Robert repeated flatly. Yes, he says it's just until he finds another job. He's desperate. Robert sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. He humiliated you, Helen. He stripped you of your dignity. And now he expects you to save him? Tears blurred her vision. He's my son. Robert's voice hardened. And you are my wife. I won't stand by while he treats you like this. He leaned forward, his eyes fierce. Tomorrow, in that boardroom, the truth will come out, and Daniel will have a choice: respect his mother or lose everything. Helen's breath caught. Robert, please, don't destroy him. Robert's expression softened, but his resolve did not. Sometimes destruction is the only way to rebuild. I'm not doing this to ruin him. I'm doing it to save him and to honor you. Helen's heart pounded. She wanted to argue, to beg him to leave it alone. But deep inside, a part of her, the part that had knelt scrubbing her son's toilet while he laughed, wanted to see his arrogance crumble. That night she lay awake again, torn between dread and hope. Her son's future hung on the edge of a blade, and Robert held the blade in his hand. The morning of the meeting dawned gray and heavy. Robert dressed in a dark suit Helen had never seen before, his shoulders squared, his movements purposeful. He kissed her forehead before leaving. By tonight things will be different, he said simply. Helen stood in the doorway, watching his truck disappear down the street, her stomach twisting with fear. At 10:15 the phone rang. Her heart lurched when she saw Daniel's name. She answered with shaking hands. Mom, Daniel said, his voice strained, urgent. They're here. Fitz's people. Peterson wants me in the conference room in 5 minutes. He hesitated, then added, almost shamefully, Mom, about what I said the other day, about you being an embarrassment. I was stressed. It wasn't fair. I didn't mean it. Helen's eyes stung. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was the closest she had heard in years. Daniel, she whispered, just be strong. I'll call you after, he said quickly. Thank you for listening last night. It meant more than you know. Then he hung up. Helen set the phone down, her chest tight. She sat by the window, staring out at the autumn sky, praying silently. She didn't know what was happening in that Chicago boardroom, but she knew the truth was about to break open like a storm. 2 hours later, the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Daniel, it was Robert. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "It's done," he said. "Everything has changed. Daniel will be calling you soon, and he will not be the same man you knew yesterday." Helen gripped the receiver, her pulse racing. "Robert, what did you do?" There was a pause, heavy and deliberate. Then Robert answered quietly, "I told them the truth." The line went dead. What truth did Robert reveal in that boardroom, and how will Daniel face his mother after being unmasked in front of everyone? The boardroom at Davidson Marketing smelled faintly of leather and polished wood. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the steel-gray skyline of Chicago, but no one looked at the view. The executives sat rigid in their high-backed chairs, the air so tense it could snap. Daniel Carter shifted uncomfortably at the far end of the table. His palms were damp, his tie too tight. He glanced at his boss, Mr. Peterson, who was flipping through a packet of legal notes with restless fingers. No one spoke above a murmur. The Fitz Industries team was expected any minute, and everyone knew the stakes. If Fitz pulled their contract, Davidson would bleed out within months. The door opened. Heads turned. Robert Mitchell, though here he was, Robert Fitzgerald, walked in with 2 senior attorneys at his side. He wore a dark, perfectly tailored suit, his silver hair combed back, his expression sharp and unreadable. He carried no notes, no laptop. He didn't need them. Daniel's stomach lurched. He knew this man, at least he thought he did. Robert was his mother's quiet new husband, the one who drove an old truck and grew tomatoes in the backyard. Yet the man striding into the boardroom now radiated authority that silenced the room before he even spoke. "Mr. Fitzgerald," Peterson said, standing quickly, his voice forced bright. "Thank you for coming. Please, let's begin." Robert inclined his head and sat at the head of the table, directly opposite Peterson. His attorneys flanked him, their expressions grim. Daniel sat frozen halfway down the table, his heart hammering. The legal discussion began: liability for the plant accident, safety audits, PR campaigns. Voices rose, papers rustled. But Robert remained silent, watching, his eyes scanning each executive like a man weighing more than contracts. Finally, he raised a hand. The room stilled instantly. "Before we move forward with business," Robert said, his voice smooth but edged with steel, "there's a personal matter I need to address." Peterson frowned, uncertain. "Of course, Mr. Fitzgerald." Robert's gaze swept the table, then landed squarely on Daniel. "It concerns one of your employees." Daniel's chest tightened. He shifted in his chair, praying Robert meant someone else. "This young man," Robert continued evenly, "is my stepson." A ripple of surprise spread through the room. Peterson's eyes darted toward Daniel, wide with shock. Robert leaned forward, folding his hands. "Yesterday, I learned something troubling. My wife, his mother, was humiliated in her own son's home, made to scrub a bathroom like a servant, told she was an embarrassment by the very child she sacrificed everything to raise." The silence was deafening. Every executive stared, their expressions ranging from disbelief to discomfort. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. "Mr. Fitzgerald," he began, his voice cracking. Robert cut him off with a raised hand. "No, Daniel. You will listen." His voice sharpened. "I built Fitz Industries from the ground up. I know what it means to work, to sacrifice. And I know what respect looks like. If a man cannot respect his own mother, how can he respect anyone? His colleagues, his clients, his responsibilities?" Daniel's throat constricted. Shame pressed against his ribs, suffocating. He could feel his coworkers' eyes drilling into him, judging, condemning. Robert turned to Peterson. "So here is my condition. Fitz Industries will continue its partnership with Davidson Marketing on one condition. This man," he gestured toward Daniel, "will stand, here and now, in front of his colleagues and apologize to his mother, publicly, acknowledging what he has done, or this contract is finished." Gasps whispered around the table. Peterson paled, clutching his pen. Daniel's vision blurred. He wanted to disappear, to crawl out of the room and never return, but the silence pressed down, demanding an answer. His boss's eyes bored into him, desperate, pleading, "Do it. Save the company." Daniel pushed back his chair, his legs trembling. He rose slowly, his voice shaking. He swallowed hard. "I want to apologize to my mother. She gave everything for me, and I treated her with cruelty, with disrespect. His voice cracked. He forced the words out, his eyes burning. "I am ashamed, and I'm sorry." The room was silent, except for the pounding of Daniel's heart. He felt stripped bare, his pride in tatters, his shame on display for everyone to see. Robert's gaze held him for a long moment, then finally softened. He nodded once. "Then we can move forward." Peterson exhaled audibly, relief flooding his face. The meeting lurched back into motion, contracts, clauses, negotiations, but Daniel barely heard a word. He stood frozen in humiliation, the image of his mother's tear-streaked face etched into his mind. When the meeting finally ended, Daniel stumbled out into the hallway, his legs weak. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with trembling hands. A text from Robert. "Call your mother. Now." Daniel leaned against the cool wall, his chest heaving. He closed his eyes, the weight of everything crashing down. For the first time in years, he felt like a little boy again, frightened, lost, desperate for his mother's comfort. He pressed her number with shaking fingers. Helen was in the kitchen when the phone rang. She saw Daniel's name flash on the screen, her pulse quickening. She answered softly. "Daniel?" His voice broke immediately. "Mom, we need to talk. Right now." Helen's heart clenched. "What happened?" His breath shuddered. "I had to apologize. In front of everyone. Peterson, the Fitz attorneys, the whole board. Robert, he told them everything. He told them what I did to you." His voice cracked. "Mom, I've never felt so humiliated in my life." Helen closed her eyes, gripping the phone. Her son's pride had finally cracked open. But was this humiliation the breaking point or the beginning of something new? "Please," Daniel whispered, his voice raw, stripped of all arrogance. "Please let me come see you. I don't know what to do. I don't know who I am anymore." Helen's hand trembled on the receiver. She wanted to welcome him, to comfort him as she always had. But part of her remembered the sting of his words, the way he had reduced her to nothing. And then, faintly in the background, Helen heard Fallon's voice, sharp, angry, rising. "Who are you talking to, Daniel? Don't tell me you're begging your mother now." The line went silent. Will Daniel choose his wife's scorn or his mother's forgiveness? And what role will Robert play in the fracture that is about to split wide open? The knock on Helen's door rattled the small house. It wasn't polite, hesitant, or casual. It was urgent, almost desperate. She froze, dish towel in her hand, heart racing. Through the window, she saw Daniel's car, parked crooked in the driveway, headlights still on. He was out of the car before she could even breathe, pacing the porch with his hands in his hair. Helen opened the door slowly. "Daniel?" He turned toward her, his face pale, eyes red-rimmed. For a moment, he looked like the boy she had raised, the boy who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms. But then the storm inside him broke. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his voice raw. "Why didn't you tell me who Robert really was?" Helen stepped back, startled. "Daniel, please come inside." He pushed past her, pacing the living room. His voice rose with every word. "Do you have any idea what happened today? Do you know what it felt like to stand there, in front of my boss, my colleagues, and confess what I did to you?" He told them everything, Mom. Everything. Helen closed the door softly. "Daniel, lower your voice." "Don't tell me to lower my voice," he exploded, slamming his hand against the back of the couch. "You let me walk into that meeting blind. You let me humiliate myself in front of everyone. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you warn me?" Helen's chest tightened. "Because it wasn't my truth to tell. Robert wanted to wait until what?" Daniel cut her off bitterly. "Until he could use it against me? Until he could strip me bare in front of everyone? God, Mom, do you have any idea how small I felt?" Her eyes stung with tears. "Do you have any idea how small I felt on my knees scrubbing your bathroom while Fallon laughed?" The words hit him like a slap. He froze, staring at her, his chest heaving. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavier than the shouting had been. Finally, Daniel's shoulders sagged. His voice broke. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't even know when I became this person. I don't recognize myself anymore." Helen stepped closer, laying a trembling hand on his arm. "Then maybe this is your chance to change." But before Daniel could answer, the front door swung open. Fallon stood in the doorway, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor, her face twisted with fury. "There you are," she snapped at Daniel. "Do you know what people are saying? Do you know what kind of humiliation you dragged me into today? Everyone knows your mother married Robert Fitzgerald. Everyone knows your career hangs by his goodwill. Do you realize how pathetic you looked in that room?" "Fallon," Helen began, but Fallon's glare silenced her. "This is your fault," Fallon hissed. "You and your little act playing poor, playing helpless, while you were sitting on a gold mine. You let me treat you like garbage when you had all this power in your back pocket. Do you think that makes you noble? No, it makes you a fool." Helen's cheeks burned. She opened her mouth, but Robert's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Enough." He stood in the doorway, his presence filling the space. He hadn't raised his voice, but the weight of his authority silenced Fallon instantly. "This is my home," Robert said calmly, "and you will not speak to my wife that way." Fallon's lips curled into a sneer. "Your wife? She's the reason my husband just destroyed his reputation. She's the reason Davidson Marketing is the laughingstock of Chicago. You should have kept your little secret buried." Robert stepped forward, his gaze steady. The only thing buried was decency, and today, the truth dug it back up. Daniel's head dropped into his hands. "Stop, just stop. I can't take this anymore." The room fell silent. Helen reached toward her son, but he pulled away, his voice hollow. "Fallon's right. I'm ruined. Peterson will never trust me again. My colleagues looked at me like I was dirt, and Fallon," he glanced at his wife, whose arms were crossed tightly across her chest. "Fallon wants out, don't you?" Fallon's silence was answer enough. Robert crossed his arms, his tone even. "Maybe it's time you asked yourself what's worth saving, your marriage or your soul." Daniel looked up, his eyes shining with tears. "And what if I've already lost both?" Later that night, after Fallon stormed out and Daniel sat slumped on the couch, Helen brewed tea the way she used to when he was a boy. She set the cup in front of him, her hands shaking. He didn't drink. He just stared at it. "I don't deserve this," he muttered. Helen sat beside him, her voice gentle. "It's not about deserving. It's about whether you're ready to change." His laugh was bitter. "Change? Mom, I've spent years building this life. The house, the cars, Fallon, and now it's all crashing down. I don't even know where to start picking up the pieces." She reached for his hand. "Start with the truth. Start with respect. Start with me." Daniel's eyes filled again, and for the first time in years, he let his mother hold his hand. From the hallway, Robert watched quietly, his expression softening. He knew the road ahead would be brutal, but maybe, just maybe, this was the crack where the light could come in. The quiet was broken by the sound of a car door slamming outside. Tires crunched on the gravel driveway. Robert's eyes narrowed. "It's too late for visitors." Helen rose, peering through the window. A sleek black sedan idled at the curb. Two men in suits stepped out, their faces grim. Daniel frowned. "Who are they?" The men approached the porch, one carrying a folder tucked under his arm. They knocked firmly, twice. Robert opened the door, his jaw set. "Mr. Fitzgerald?" the taller man asked. "We need to speak with you immediately. It's about the accident at the plant." Helen's stomach dropped. Something in the man's tone made her blood run cold. What new secret lies behind the accident at Fitz Industries? And how will this twist change everything for Robert, Helen, and Daniel? The two men stepped into the living room, their shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. Helen instinctively tightened her robe at the neck, her heart hammering. The taller man removed a slim folder from under his arm and spoke with practiced calm. "Mr. Fitzgerald, we represent the independent investigation team assigned to the Fitz Industries plant accident. There are developments you need to be aware of." Robert gestured toward the kitchen table. "Sit down. Tell me what you know." The men exchanged glances before taking their seats. One of them, younger and visibly nervous, flipped open the folder. Helen leaned against the counter. Daniel slumped on the couch, and the room seemed to shrink around the tension. The investigator cleared his throat. Preliminary reports suggest the sterilization unit that malfunctioned had been flagged for replacement 3 separate times in the last 18 months. Each time the request was marked as pending and then closed without follow-up. Robert's jaw tightened. Who signed off on those closures? The man hesitated. Your head of operations at the New Jersey facility. But there's more. He slid a photo across the table. Robert stared down at the grainy image of a document, an invoice stamped with Davidson Marketing's logo. Daniel's head snapped up. That's impossible. We don't handle equipment. We handle advertising. The investigator's gaze shifted to him. The invoice covers promotional expenses tied to budget reallocations. Funds that were originally marked for equipment upgrades appear to have been redirected into a campaign Davidson handled. Silence fell like a stone. Robert's eyes narrowed. You're saying money meant for safety upgrades was funneled into marketing projects? The investigator nodded grimly. And it happened more than once. Helen covered her mouth with her hand. Dear God. Daniel surged to his feet. No, this has to be a mistake. I never Peterson would have overseen all of that. I didn't sign anything. His voice cracked, desperation flooding in. I swear, Mom, I didn't know. Robert studied his stepson, his gaze sharp as a scalpel. Didn't know or didn't ask? Daniel's chest heaved. He looked between Robert and Helen, panic rising like a tide. If this sticks, it won't just kill Davidson Marketing, it could ruin me. Criminal negligence, corporate fraud, I could lose everything. Fallon's voice echoed in his head, sharp and merciless. Do you realize how pathetic you looked? He pressed his fist to his temples. The investigator closed the folder. We'll be questioning senior staff tomorrow morning. If your name appears on any of these authorizations, Mr. Carter, you'll need to answer for it. Daniel's knees buckled, and he collapsed back onto the couch. I'm finished. Robert leaned back in his chair, his expression carved from stone. You're not finished. Not yet. But if you're lying, if you knew about this, then I can't protect you. Helen's eyes filled with tears. Please, Robert, he's my son. Robert's voice softened slightly as he looked at her. And this is my company's name. If lives were risked for profit, someone has to pay for it. Justice comes before reputation, Helen. The investigators rose. We'll be in touch tomorrow. They left the folder on the table, then stepped out into the night, their sedan disappearing down the street. The silence they left behind was heavier than any words. Daniel buried his face in his hands. I swear I didn't know, Mom. I never would have let something like this happen. Helen sat beside him, stroking his hair like she used to when he was a boy. Then fight for the truth. Don't run from it. Robert remained standing, staring out the window into the darkness. He spoke without turning. Tomorrow, you'll have to decide who you are, Daniel. The man who ignored his mother, or the man who finally learns what respect and responsibility mean. Daniel looked up, his eyes bloodshot. And if Peterson throws me under the bus? Robert finally turned, his gaze hard. Then you stand tall and take what's yours. The truth will surface. But if you've been complicit, he let the sentence trail off, the unspoken consequence lingering like smoke. Helen shivered. The hours crawled by. Daniel dozed fitfully on the couch while Helen sat awake, staring at the folder left behind. The invoices, the signatures, the trails of numbers, it all looked like a foreign language. But one thing she understood clearly. Her son was standing on the edge of a cliff, and tomorrow would decide whether he fell. At dawn, Robert brewed coffee in silence. His movements were steady, deliberate. Helen studied him, sensing the storm brewing behind his calm. Robert, she whispered, if Daniel didn't know, can you help him? He met her eyes, and she saw the conflict there. I can't bend the truth, but I can make sure he has the chance to tell it. Daniel stirred, groaning, his suit wrinkled from sleep. I don't know if I can face them, he muttered. They'll eat me alive. Helen knelt in front of him, cupping his face. Look at me. You've made mistakes, yes, but this isn't the end unless you let it be. Tell the truth, Daniel. That's all you have left. His lips trembled. And if the truth destroys me? She kissed his forehead. Then at least you'll know you didn't destroy yourself with lies. The morning air was sharp when they arrived at the Davidson offices. Helen insisted on coming. She refused to sit at home waiting. Robert entered first, his presence commanding. Daniel trailed behind, pale and anxious, clutching his briefcase like a lifeline. In the conference room, Peterson was already seated, his expression tight. The investigators sat across from him, the folder open, documents spread out like weapons. "Mr. Carter," the lead investigator began, "we need clarification. These budget reallocations, did you approve them?" Daniel's mouth went dry. "No, I didn't. I never even saw these invoices." Peterson's lips pressed into a thin line. "Daniel, your initials are here." He pointed to the bottom of one page. Daniel's heart lurched. He stared at the scrawl. It looked like his, but blurred, sloppy. "That's not mine. I never signed this. Someone forged it." The room buzzed with murmurs. The investigators leaned forward. "Are you claiming fraud within your own company?" Daniel looked at his boss, his chest pounding. "Peterson, tell them. You know I never handled budget authorizations." Peterson's face was unreadable. After a long pause, he leaned back in his chair. Daniel was responsible for client accounts. He knew where the funds were being used. If he says he didn't sign, that's on him to prove. Daniel's world tilted. His boss was throwing him to the wolves. Robert's hand slammed the table, the sound reverberating through the room. "Enough. If you're going to accuse him, produce evidence. Otherwise, this is scapegoating, and I won't tolerate it." The investigators exchanged glances. One scribbled notes. The tension was suffocating. Helen sat in the back, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. She wanted to run to her son, shield him like she had when he was small. But all she could do was watch as his fate balanced on the blade of truth. The lead investigator finally spoke. "We'll need to conduct handwriting analysis. Until then, Mr. Carter, you are officially under review. Do not leave the city." Daniel's face drained of color. He staggered to his feet, panic in his eyes. "They think I forged those signatures. Mom, what if I go to prison?" Helen's breath caught in her throat. Robert's voice was calm, but edged with steel. "Then we uncover who really did this. And fast." As they left the building, Helen clutched Daniel's arm, whispering, "We'll get through this. We will." But just as they reached the car, Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his face darkening. "What is it?" Helen asked. Robert hesitated, then slid the phone back into his pocket. "It's worse than I thought. Someone inside Fitz may have wanted that accident to happen." Helen froze, the wind whipping around her. Who inside Fitz Industries would sabotage their own company, and why? The drive back from Davidson's offices was heavy with silence. Helen sat in the back seat, her hands clenched together so tightly that her knuckles were white. Daniel rode in the passenger seat, staring blankly out the window, his jaw twitching with every mile that passed. Robert drove, his face unreadable, his grip on the steering wheel firm and steady. The city gave way to quiet neighborhoods, then to open stretches of highway. Finally, Robert spoke. "What I didn't tell the investigators," he said, his voice low, "is that I've been warned about possible internal sabotage for months. Anonymous emails, whispers in board meetings. People suggesting that someone high up has been siphoning funds and deliberately delaying safety upgrades." Helen leaned forward, her heart hammering. "Sabotage? Why would anyone?" "Money," Robert cut her off grimly. "Or power. If Fitz Industries looks weak, stock prices fall. People in the shadows profit. Competitors circle like vultures. And someone close to the heart of this company wanted that accident to happen." Daniel turned, his voice raw. "And now they're framing me." Robert nodded once. "Exactly." Helen pressed her hand against her chest. "Dear God. Robert, if that's true, how do we stop it?" Robert's eyes flicked toward her in the rearview mirror. "We find out who's pulling the strings, fast." That night, Robert retreated into his office with the folder the investigators had left. Papers were spread across the desk like shards of broken glass. Helen brought him coffee, her hands trembling as she set the mug down. He looked up briefly, his eyes softening for her alone. "Go to bed, sweetheart. This could take all night." But Helen shook her head. "No, I'll sit with you." Together, they pored over the invoices, line items, and budget reallocations. Over and over, Daniel's supposed initials appeared at the bottom of documents, but something gnawed at Robert. "The handwriting isn't consistent," he muttered. "Look at the slope here, the spacing here. It's close but not exact." Helen squinted. "So someone copied his signature?" Robert leaned back, exhaling sharply. "Yes, and whoever did it knew that Daniel was vulnerable. His arrogance made him an easy target. People would believe he signed without thinking." Helen's throat tightened. "So he's being scapegoated?" Robert nodded grimly. Meanwhile, Daniel lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Fallon's voice echoed in his mind, cruel and relentless, pathetic, ruined, embarrassment. He buried his face in his hands. He had spent his whole life chasing respect through titles, through money, through Fallon's approval. And yet here he was, stripped of it all, clinging to the mother he had once cast aside. "Who am I?" he whispered into the darkness. The question lingered like a ghost. By morning, Robert had identified patterns. The forged signatures were linked to projects Peterson himself had authorized, projects with inflated budgets and padded expenses. Robert's jaw hardened. Peterson. He's the one funneling money. He set Daniel up to take the fall. Helen gasped. "Then you have to tell the investigators." Robert's eyes darkened. "Not yet. If I accuse him without solid proof, he'll spin it. Peterson has friends on the board, in the press. We need evidence no one can refute." Daniel stumbled into the room, pale and disheveled. "Evidence of what?" Robert looked at him squarely. "Your boss. He's framing you. But if we're going to clear your name, you'll have to fight alongside us." Daniel's eyes widened. "After everything I did to you to Mom, you're still willing to help me?" Robert's voice was steady. "I don't fight for you, Daniel. I fight for her. And she believes you deserve a second chance. Don't make her regret it." Helen placed her hand over Robert's. Gratitude welled in her chest, so fierce it brought tears to her eyes. 2 days later, Robert arranged a private meeting with one of his most trusted contacts inside Fitz Industries, a woman named Evelyn Hayes, head of compliance. They met in a quiet corner of a Chicago cafe, the hum of conversation masking their words. "Evelyn," Robert said, leaning in, "I need everything you can find on Davidson's budget reallocations. Peterson's fingerprints are all over this, and I need it airtight." Evelyn's eyes flickered with caution. "You're asking me to go up against a man who's been untouchable for years. He has allies in high places." Robert's gaze didn't waver. "Then we make him untouchable no longer." Evelyn studied him for a long moment before nodding. "I'll get you what you need, but be careful. Peterson won't go down quietly." That night, Helen found Daniel sitting on the porch, staring at the quiet street. "Mom," he said softly, "when I was a kid, I used to think you could fix anything. A scraped knee, a broken toy, a nightmare. And now I've broken something so big I don't know if anyone can fix it." Helen sat beside him, taking his hand. "You're not broken, Daniel. You're bent, and bending is how we learn to stand taller." His throat tightened. For the first time in years, he let her words sink deep. 2 days later, Evelyn delivered. Robert laid the documents on the kitchen table like cards in a high-stakes poker game. Peterson had signed off on every fraudulent reallocation. The money trail was undeniable. "This is it," Robert said, his voice firm. "With this, we can exonerate Daniel." Helen exhaled shakily, relief flooding through her. But Robert's face remained grave. "There's more." Evelyn also found communications between Peterson and an outside competitor. He wasn't just stealing money, he was deliberately weakening Fitz to open the door for a hostile takeover. Helen's blood ran cold. "So the accident was part of the plan," Robert finished grimly. "If Fitz looks unstable, stock prices drop. Peterson and his partners buy in cheap, then profit when the company stabilizes. It's sabotage on a corporate scale." Daniel's face drained of color. "And I was the perfect pawn." Robert's jaw clenched. "Not anymore. Tomorrow we take this to the board." That night, Helen barely slept. She prayed in the quiet darkness, prayed that justice would prevail, that her son would finally learn humility, that Robert's fight would not destroy him in the process. But deep inside, a fear gnawed at her. People like Peterson didn't surrender easily. The next morning, Robert, Helen, and Daniel arrived at Fitz headquarters. The boardroom was larger, grander than Davidson's glass walls, sleek chrome, an air of money and power. Executives whispered as they filed in, their eyes darting between Robert and Daniel. At the head of the table sat Peterson, calm and smug, his tailored suit flawless. He smiled thinly when Robert entered. "Robert," he drawled, "always a pleasure. I assume you're here to finalize our contract termination with Davidson?" Robert set a thick folder on the table. His eyes were icy. "On the contrary, I'm here to finalize your termination." The room erupted in whispers. Peterson's smile faltered. Robert opened the folder, sliding copies of documents across the table. "Here is the trail of stolen funds. Here are the fraudulent authorizations. Here are the communications between you and Blackwell Industries." Gasps echoed around the room. Board members leaned forward, eyes widening as the evidence piled up. Peterson's face darkened. "This is outrageous. Fabricated." Robert's voice was thunder. "Do you dare accuse Evelyn Hayes of fabrication? She risked her career to bring this forward. The truth is plain. You endangered lives, sabotaged contracts, and framed my stepson to cover your tracks." All eyes turned to Daniel. He sat rigid, sweat beading on his forehead, but for once he didn't shrink away. "I made mistakes," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "I disrespected my family. I let arrogance blind me. But I didn't forge those documents, and I won't take the fall for crimes I didn't commit." The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement. Peterson's grip tightened on the table. "You'll regret this, Robert," he spat. Robert leaned in, his voice low but deadly. "No, you will." As the board members began voting to suspend Peterson, the double doors of the boardroom slammed open. A security officer rushed in, his face pale. "Mr. Fitzgerald, we've just received a bomb threat against this building." Gasps filled the room. Helen's heart stopped. Daniel's eyes widened in terror. Robert's expression turned to stone. Is Peterson desperate enough to orchestrate violence? And will Helen and Daniel survive the storm that has just turned deadly? The boardroom erupted into chaos. Executives scrambled to their feet, voices overlapping, chairs screeching against polished floors. The word bomb crackled like static through the air, shattering composure and leaving only raw fear behind. Helen clutched the table, her breath shallow. Daniel froze, pale as chalk, while Robert stood unflinching, his hand raised for silence. "Calm yourselves," he said firmly. "Panicking won't save anyone." The security officer's voice wavered. The threat came through an anonymous call to the front desk. "Standard protocol is evacuation, but Mr. Fitzgerald, we think Peterson might be involved." All eyes swiveled toward Peterson. His face was tight, his jaw clenched, but his eyes betrayed the flicker of panic. "This is insane," he snapped. "You can't possibly think I'd—" Robert's voice cut through like a blade. "You endangered lives once already. Why should anyone believe you wouldn't do it again?" The room fell silent. Helen's heart thundered as Robert turned to the security officer. "Evacuate the building, quietly, and have Peterson escorted to holding until the police arrive." Peterson exploded, lunging from his chair. "You can't do this to me. I built half the contracts in this company." Two guards moved in swiftly, grabbing his arms as he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "This isn't over, Robert. You'll regret this." Helen clutched Daniel's hand as they followed the crowd down the emergency stairwell, her chest tight with fear. She whispered a prayer under her breath, begging for safety, for mercy. Outside, the cool Chicago air hit her lungs like ice. Dozens of employees milled around on the sidewalk, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Police cars pulled up, lights flashing red and blue against the glass facade of Fitz Industries headquarters. Helen squeezed Daniel's hand, grounding herself. For once, he didn't pull away. He leaned into her, his trembling body betraying the child within the man. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered hoarsely. "I'm so sorry for everything. If I lose everything else, I just don't want to lose you." Her eyes filled with tears. "You'll never lose me, Daniel, but you may have to lose who you were." An hour later, the building was cleared, no bomb, only a threat. Peterson was taken away in handcuffs, his protests echoing across the plaza as reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. Robert stood like a sentinel beside Helen, his arm firm around her shoulders. Daniel watched from a distance, his eyes haunted. The press turned their lenses on Robert. Questions flew like darts. Was Peterson responsible for the accident? How deep did the fraud go? Would Fitz survive the scandal? Robert answered with calm authority. Fitz Industries will always stand for integrity. Lives were put at risk. That will never happen again. As for the man responsible, justice is already in motion. Cheers rippled through the crowd. Reporters scribbled furiously. Robert's words carried the weight of finality, the tone of a man who had nothing left to prove. That evening, back at their modest home, Helen curled up on the couch, exhausted but grateful to simply be alive. Robert sat beside her, his hand warm in hers. Daniel lingered in the doorway, looking uncertain, like a boy who wasn't sure if he was welcome at the table. Helen patted the seat beside her. "Come sit, sweetheart." Daniel hesitated, then crossed the room, and Saturday, his shoulders sagged, his eyes brimming with humility. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring," he admitted, his voice raw. "I could lose my job. I could lose Fallon, though maybe that's already gone. But if I can start over, I want to do it right this time. I want to earn your respect back." Helen's throat tightened. "Respect isn't earned by perfection, Daniel. It's earned by truth. And today, for the first time in years, I heard you speak the truth." Tears slid down his cheeks, and he didn't bother to hide them. He leaned into her embrace, resting his head on her shoulder like he had as a child. Robert watched silently, his eyes softening. He had fought battles in boardrooms his entire life, but this fragile reunion between mother and son was the victory that mattered most. Days turned into weeks. Fitz stabilized, Peterson faced indictment, and Evelyn Hayes was named interim head of operations. The fraud investigation cleared Daniel of wrongdoing, though his career at Davidson Marketing was over. Fallon filed for divorce within days of the scandal, citing irreconcilable differences. Daniel moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't glamorous, but it was his, and for the first time in years, he began to understand what humility felt like. Every Sunday, he came to Helen's house for dinner. Sometimes they talked for hours, sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, but every week the distance between them shrank a little more. Helen rediscovered laughter, soft, genuine laughter she thought had died long ago. She and Robert tended the garden together, drank coffee on the porch, and found joy in the ordinary. For the first time in decades, she felt whole. On a crisp autumn evening, as golden leaves scattered across the yard, Helen sat with Robert and Daniel at the dinner table. The warmth of pot roast and candlelight wrapped around them, fragile but real. And then 3 sharp knocks at the door. All 3 froze. Robert rose, his face tightening, and opened the door. A courier handed him a thick envelope marked with the seal of a federal agency. Robert broke the seal, his eyes scanning the document inside, his face darkened. Helen's voice trembled. "What is it?" Robert looked up, his gaze heavy. "It seems Peterson wasn't acting alone. There are names on this list, and one of them is someone we know." Helen's stomach turned to ice. Daniel whispered, "Who? Who else could be involved?" Robert closed the folder slowly, his expression unreadable. Who else has been hiding in the shadows? And what new betrayal is about to shatter the fragile peace they've fought so hard to build? This story carries a weight far greater than a tale of corporate betrayal or family conflict. It speaks to the core of what it means to be human. At its heart, it reminds us that love, respect, and truth are worth more than any title, paycheck, or social approval. Helen's journey is not just the story of a mother who was humiliated by her own son, but the story of countless parents who give everything only to find themselves dismissed when the world measures worth in money and appearances. Through her quiet dignity and the unwavering support of Robert, we see that self-respect does not vanish when others deny it. It can be reclaimed, even rebuilt stronger, when one refuses to bow to cruelty. Daniel's fall from arrogance to humility reflects a truth many of us recognize. Success without gratitude is hollow. In losing what he thought defined him, his wife, his status, his pride, he found the chance to rediscover the love he had neglected. And in Helen's forgiveness, we glimpse the power of grace, a reminder that people can change and that bridges can be rebuilt, not by erasing the past but by choosing a different future. Robert's role underscores another lesson, that real strength is not in wealth or influence, but in how one uses it to protect and uplift others. His decision to defend Helen's dignity instead of exacting revenge is an example of love that heals rather than destroys. Ultimately, this story challenges us to ask ourselves, how do we measure the value of a life? Is it in achievements, appearances, or in the simple, enduring bonds of family and respect? The answer shapes not only how we treat others, but who we become.